When my mother's name appeared on the phone screen, unable to contain a sudden surge of anxiety, I almost dropped it from my hands. Not because I was waiting for a call, on the contrary, such rare and almost sacred moments of communication between us happened as rarely as solar eclipses. Twice in the last 5 years. Once, to inform me in an impassive voice about the death of Aunt Raimonda, a man whom I barely remembered, but who, according to my mother, always asked about you, and the second, to casually mention the wedding of my younger sister Laura, to which, of course, I was not invited, without even bothering to explain the reason for such neglect. "Hello," I managed cautiously, as if afraid to disturb the unstable balance between us. Her mother's voice was as flat as ever, devoid of warmth, intonation, or even a shadow of human interest. "I remembered that your sister Laura and her husband are coming to visit this weekend. They want you to come to dinner on Friday at 6, and before I could respond, she hung up. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching." I stared at the screen, which went blank, leaving behind a feeling of emptiness and something not fully said. I'm 30 years old, and I still feel like an unwanted child, a shadow in the golden glow of Laura, the one for whom family love and approval were as essential as breathing. I could have said no, maybe I even should have, but some part of me, the part that once dreamed of hearing praise, being seen, being accepted, still lived in me, and no matter what, she agreed. Friday came too fast, as it always does with moments that the soul is not ready for. I called a taxi. I avoided parking and fuss, as if it could ease my inner discomfort, and soon I found myself in front of the very house where my childhood and youth, filled with constant comparisons, had once passed, where I learned to be invisible next to a radiant Laura. I straightened my black dress, which was strict, modest, professional, and emphatically unpretentious, and knocked. There was no response. When I turned the knob, I found the door unlocked and went in. Sounds of merriment could be heard from the dining room, laughter, lively conversations, the characteristic clink of dishes. It wasn't a chamber family dinner, as I was promised, but a real reunion, aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole motley gallery of faces for whom I've always been the one who still hasn't settled in. I stopped in the doorway of the dining room, glancing at the familiar surroundings, where everything seemed the same as in the past, except perhaps my presence, which no one noticed. The mother and father sat on either side of the table, like guardians of the family hearth. Laura and her husband, David, sat in the center, like a royal couple on a throne of praise and admiration. The rest of the seats were occupied by relatives, completely absorbed in their stories. "The second establishment should open by the summer," Laura said enthusiastically, gesturing as if she were orchestrating her own success. "David's business is just booming, isn't it, dear David?" She turned to her husband, who nodded with a smug smile. His car repair shop, as Cousin Amy told me in one of her rare messages, was really going up. "And Caleb is already speaking in full sentences," Laura added proudly, mentioning her son. "The pediatrician says he is 2 years ahead of development." My mother beamed with pride, my father nodded approvingly, and the relatives made admiring noises together, as if each of them had personally had a hand in these achievements. No one noticed me. I was still standing at the door, as if I were a shadow, a random passerby in my own childhood. I looked for an empty seat, but I couldn't find one. However, I didn't expect anything else. Laura's gaze finally fell on me. Her smile hadn't changed. It was still perfect, well-trained, but there was a jibe in it, almost undisguised. "Well, look who's finally decided to join us," she announced loudly, and all heads turned in my direction. "Come in, Bella, sit down with the successful people this time." I held back a grin without saying a word. Aunt Linda pushed back her chair, giving me a seat on the very edge. I sat down, balancing on the fine line of physical and emotional presence, while Laura continued. "We are opening a second store right here in the city. David will travel between the two until he finds the right manager. He trusts my parents, and they," she glanced at them, not enthusiastically. "Your father and I are so proud of you," Mom said, putting her hand on Laura's shoulder. "You have achieved a lot for yourself." For a moment, there was silence in the room, in which one could hear one's own heart. And then Laura looked at me. "So, Bella," her voice was laced with honey and fake concern, "are you still working as a waitress at that restaurant?" There was silence at the table, unexpected and full of tension, as if the air in the room had become thicker and the gazes heavier. Everyone without exception turned to me, expecting me to either make excuses or maybe try to prove to them that there is a place for success in my life too. But I straightened up slightly, letting the silence envelop me like a thick veil, and said calmly, without raising my voice, but clearly enough for everyone to hear, "Yes, I still work at that restaurant." I didn't add a word about my current situation, didn't tell them that this institution belongs to me, that I own a controlling stake and monitor reports daily in my office on the top floor, preferring sometimes to go out into the hall and become one of them, those who serve, but not because they have to, but because he wants to remember where it all started. Let them think what they want. Laura laughed, but her laughter had nothing to do with mirth. It was sharp, like the rasp of glass on metal, brittle, like an ice crust that cracks underfoot, and there was anger in that sound, with a hint of malice. "God, you've always been such a loser," she said, addressing her relatives, as if looking for support in them, and they certainly didn't let her down. Someone grinned, someone giggled softly. Even my parents couldn't resist a knowing look at each other, accompanied by a barely noticeable, but with an eloquent nod. And all this, it would seem, should have hurt me, caused a storm inside, but instead I just allowed myself an invisible, almost intimate smile, the kind that people give themselves in the mirror in the early morning before a new important day. If only they knew. Laura suddenly clapped her hands, interrupting the murmur of conversation and returning everyone's attention to herself. "In fact, I gathered you today for a reason. Next Saturday, David and I are having dinner at the best restaurant in the city to celebrate the success of our business. It's going to be really amazing," she declared enthusiastically, and an excited whisper went around the table. The faces perked up, sparkled with expectation, until Laura turned back to me, and there was not a shadow of sisterly warmth in her gaze, only sarcastic curiosity, reinforced by a poisonously sweet smile. "Except for you, Bella. I'm not inviting you. You're too poor to be a part of such a celebration. You wouldn't fit in." I wanted to answer, but before I could, my mother, picking up on the wave of ridicule, added, "Unless you work there as a waitress, of course. Then why don't you serve us at the table?" And she burst into a ringing laugh, which was quickly joined by the others. I looked at them all, and it seemed like I saw myself in a distant childhood, the same girl who stood with torn jeans and asked for at least a little attention. They expected me to break down, explode, cry, or maybe jump up and scream, but I just picked up my fork, finished the last pieces from my plate, dabbed my lips with a napkin, and said flatly, "I won't insist. Enjoy the evening." Their faces fell in disappointment, as if I hadn't lived up to expectations, hadn't provided the spectacle it was all about. And when it became clear that my restraint was not a temporary calm before the storm, but a stable armor, interest in me faded, and the discussion returned to familiar topics: which restaurant they would go to, who would sit where, what dishes they would order. I slowly gathered up my purse, got up noiselessly and slipped out of the room, where no one even noticed my departure, no one tried to stop me, no one threw words of farewell after me. A taxi took me to a building, not just a house, but an architectural work located in the heart of the city, where the air smells of expensive perfumes and the windows reflect the light of advertisements and evening lights. The doorman, immaculately dressed, greeted me by name with a polite bow, and I walked through the marble lobby to a private elevator, which scanned my fingerprint and gently slid up to my penthouse. Kicking off my shoes at the door, I poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle standing in a cooling niche, and couldn't help but laugh, softly, sincerely, with a hint of sadness and triumph, at how easy it is to be invisible to those who think they know you. They still saw me as a poor waitress, a family loser, a girl whose place is in the corner, whose dreams are empty, and success is impossible. But they didn't know who I had become, and what the price was. And I couldn't help but remember how it all started, at the age of 16, from the first steps to freedom, from a dirty cafe in the city center that smelled of overcooked butter and cheap coffee. Not because I wanted to work, but because I needed to. "Mom, I need new jeans," I said one day when I got home from school. "They're full of holes." She didn't even look at me, but was busy helping Laura with her science project, which was neatly framed on colored cardboard. "Don't be so demanding, Bella. We can't afford to buy you new clothes every time you want them." By this time, Laura already had a new iPhone, the third in 2 years, and her closet was full of dresses that she didn't even have time to put on. I continued to use the old cot and carry the clothes that my cousins had given me. So I went and got a job at that cafe where the pay was low, but every penny meant freedom to me. I bought myself jeans, then a phone, then I started buying a life for myself. I remember once, when I was 17, I overheard my mother talking at a family dinner, which was taking place, as always, in a house full of voices, the smells of baked meat and the quiet tension hiding between phrases. She leaned over to Aunt Linda and said almost in a whisper, but with that cold certainty that she did not leave room for doubt, "Bella will probably be a waitress for the rest of her life." And then, as if hammering a nail, she added, "She's not as smart and talented as Laura." I was standing in the hallway with my fists clenched, feeling something flare up inside me that didn't look like pain or anger, but something much more dangerous: determination. And when I turned 18 and it was time to choose a path, my father, without taking his eyes off the evening news on TV, calmly informed me, "We can't help with your college education, Bella. We're saving up for Laura's education. She has great potential." That night, when the autumn rain was rustling outside the windows, I silently packed my things. In a backpack that had once been a school bag, I put not only clothes, but also the little self-confidence that I had accumulated, and left. No scandals, no scenes, just walked out and didn't turn around. I got a job at a restaurant in the city center, not an elegant place, not prestigious, but what I needed. It accepted everyone who was willing to work without asking unnecessary questions. I lived in a cramped apartment with 2 other waitresses, Maria and Jen. We slept on cots, shared a bathroom with 3 people, argued about whose turn it was to wash the dishes, and ate pasta with ketchup, but we still felt free, from condemnation, from comparisons, from endless criticism, which I've been exposed since childhood. At that time, I was reluctant to look at photos on social media: Laura on the beaches of the Maldives, skiing in Colorado, in Paris against the backdrop of the Eiffel Tower, in the company of our parents, smiling, as if this is exactly how it should be. They proudly announced that Laura was going to college, one of the best, although when it came to me, they said that education was too expensive. I stopped asking why. Instead, I started working even harder. The restaurant, Bellini's, was located in the center, in the area of office buildings, and although it was going through hard times, the menu was bloated, the service was unstable, and the interior was outdated. I went there every day. I watched, absorbed, and learned how the schedule was set up, how the purchase was calculated, how to communicate with customers, and how to respond to complaints. At the same time, I enrolled in a community college for evening courses in restaurant business management, paying for them 1 lesson at a time. First the basics of finance, then menu design, personnel management, marketing. It wasn't just an education, it was my weapon, my path to freedom. 2 years have passed, and I began to notice that things were getting worse at Bellini's. There were fewer and fewer visitors, higher costs, and more waste. One evening, when we had closed the restaurant, I went into the office of the owner, Robert Dawson, an elderly man with tired eyes and a glass of whiskey in his hand. He sat staring at the tables, as if trying to subtract hope from them. "Is everything all right, Mr. Dawson?" I asked, wiping down the last table. He sighed heavily and muttered, "Bella, I'm thinking about selling. This place is dying." I hesitated, but then, to my surprise, I said decisively, "Rebranding won't help." He jerked his head up as if I'd hit him. "I'm sorry, it's just the truth. The problem is not the name or the logo. The problem lies in the concept itself." I expected him to get angry, maybe even fire me, but instead he pointed to the chair across from me and said, "Tell me more." And I told him. I explained that the menu was too big and overloaded, 20 pasta dishes, but in fact we only cook 3, the rest are always with errors or delays. That we are trying to appear like a high-class institution, but we are not up to the stated level, and the prices only scare us away. What we miss is the business audience, because we don't work during the day in a lunch format, and those who work late in offices around would like delivery. I suggested reducing the menu to 15 really popular dishes, introducing multi-level pricing, and creating an atmosphere of comfort and accessibility without losing quality. He listened in silence, then asked, "Where did you learn all this?" "In college. And watching you lose money." He laughed, not sarcastically, but with genuine surprise. "How old are you, Bella?" 22, I replied. He nodded. "Do you want to become the new manager of Bellini's? Help me bring these ideas to life. I need someone who understands not only theory, but also reality. Who sees not only complaints, but also solutions." 2 weeks after that conversation with Robert, when everything still seemed fragile, shaky, and almost impossible, I already had my own small office, a room with one window, an old armchair and a table that creaked with every movement, but in which I felt strong, because along with this office he was given not only an administrative position, but also a huge, almost frightening responsibility, to take over the management of a restaurant whose future hung in the balance, and try to turn it into something more than just an institution with a lost reputation. It was both scary and exciting. Every day I woke up early and fell asleep late, working 18 hours a day, rewriting the menu, studying demand and order statistics, retraining staff, explaining the importance of standardization and service, introducing new digital accounting systems, and overseeing the renovation, which gave the establishment a modern but not pretentious look, carefully by removing everything outdated and maintaining a cozy atmosphere that could appeal to both white-collar workers between meetings and couples looking for a place to dine on a Friday night. 6 months later, when restaurateurs and other places were still talking about the crisis and falling incomes, there were live queues at the doors of Bellini's, people were waiting for tables, orders were flowing in a continuous stream, and the delivery service, another of our strategic moves, was operating non-stop, covering all nearby business centers. Not only have we stabilized the financial model, we have reduced costs by 30% and at the same time increased revenue by almost half. 2 years later, when I already knew all the details of the work from the backstage to the auditorium, we opened a second establishment in a busy area, then a third in the financial district, and each of them made a profit from the very first day, because our entire team, inspired by the results, brought the restaurant model to almost mathematical perfection. On my 24th birthday, Robert invited me to dinner, not at one of our restaurants, as was often the case, but at the most exclusive place in the city, where tables were booked months in advance, and the guest list always contained the names of influential people. We had just placed the order when he said, "I have a suggestion for you," and, looking at me with the same serious kindness that has become a symbol of support for me over the years, he continued, "I want to make you a partner, 30% ownership in all current and future restaurants of our group." I almost choked on the wine. It seemed unreal, too generous to be true. "This is not generosity, Bella," he said calmly, "this is business. You've turned one unprofitable restaurant into 3 successful businesses. I'd be an idiot if I didn't lock you in a partnership before someone else took you away." That night changed everything. I was no longer just an employee. I became a co-owner, and it gave me a new impulse, a new purpose, a new sense of reality. We expanded rapidly, 2 more establishments over the next year. Each opening was verified, each menu was tested. By my 26th birthday, I had bought a penthouse in the central part of the city, and by the time I was 28, I had already formed an investment portfolio, and I began advising other businesses on strategy and operational management. Now, at the age of 30, I have overseen 8 successful restaurants, managing more than 200 employees, and all this while my family continued to see me as a waitress, a girl with a tray, running for tips. A sudden beep on my phone brought me back to the present, a notification from Melissa, our booking manager at the First Bellini's. A big party reservation has been confirmed for Saturday at 7 p.m. Name, Laura Cooper. I stared at the message, and then I couldn't help but laugh. Of all the restaurants in the city, my sister chose mine, which, according to her, was not good enough for me to come to. The week before Saturday passed in a state of increasing tension. Every time I imagined my family entering a restaurant, unaware that it belonged to me, I felt a strange, layered mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Robert, as always, noticed my condition. At the weekly meeting, he came up after everyone had left and asked, "You're not yourself today?" "Everything is fine." Over the years, he became something more than a business partner for me. He was a mentor, a friend, almost a family, especially after his wife Diana and the children started inviting me to the holidays, knowing that no one else would do it. My family. Laura brought them all to Bellini's on Saturday, I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. In the first place. The same family that still thinks you're a waitress. The ones who didn't invite you to dinner. His eyebrows arched. I nodded. "Well, that's convenient," he said slowly, and a sly smile appeared on his face. "Are you going to tell them?" "I'm thinking about it," I admitted. Robert leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Bella, I've known you for 8 years. You haven't just changed my business, you've expanded it to a scale I never even imagined. And in all that time, you've never sought recognition from anyone but them. Don't pretend it doesn't matter." He was right, and despite all my successes, a penthouse in the city center, an investment portfolio, and 8 restaurants that I managed with the precision of a surgeon, despite the recognition in professional circles and the respect I had won, starting from the bottom, some carefully hidden part of me still craved my family's approval, or at least that fleeting moment when they finally realized how deeply mistaken they were when they reduced me to a caricature of a poor waitress with empty dreams. I wanted to see their faces at the moment when everything they thought was true would crumble like a house of cards. And I decided, I'll be there. It was Saturday night, and I was like a taut string, tense, ready to tremble at the slightest touch. I arrived at Bellini's an hour before booking to make sure everything was perfect. Although I knew that I had nothing to doubt, our staff worked flawlessly, each team member knew his place and task, and the kitchen was already preparing dishes with a skill that attracted not only local gourmets to us, but also guests from other cities. But I needed something to do to distract myself, because the thought of meeting my family wouldn't leave me for a minute. I changed into a custom-made black dress, austere and elegant, emphasizing dignity and restraint, and attached a badge that clearly read, Bella Mitchell, owner and executive director. Then I settled into my office with a panoramic glass window overlooking the main hall and waited, watching as they appeared one at a time, as if from a dream that had once been my reality. My parents, Laura and David, several aunts and uncles, and a bunch of cousins, a total of 14 people. Everyone is dressed smartly, restrainedly excited, like before a play. The host greeted them with a smile and escorted them to a large round table in the center of the room, the best place in the restaurant that Melissa had reserved for them without asking me, but as it turned out, she did it exactly the right way. Laura walked in front with majestic gestures, obviously enjoying the attention and her role as the hostess of the evening. My parents looked at her with adoration, nodding and smiling, and it was all painfully familiar, a scene from my childhood, repeated many times, only now in a different setting. I waited for them to settle in, ordered drinks and snacks, and then, taking a deep breath, I left the office and slowly walked to their table. Amy, my cousin, noticed me first, and her eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't say anything, just turned to the others. One by one, the family members began to notice me, first with recognition, then with misunderstanding. "Look who it is," Laura announced loudly, with a slightly mocking note. "Are you going to be our waitress today?" "How perfect." I smiled calmly. "Actually, I won't be able to serve you this evening. Too busy with the other tables." David chuckled. "I'm too busy running the restaurant," I replied, leaning forward slightly and pointing to the badge with my name and position. "As well as 7 other establishments of our group." The silence that followed might have seemed comical if it hadn't been so saturated with emotions: surprise, confusion, embarrassment. Everything was mixed up in the expressions of my relatives. The mother's jaw dropped, the father's face turned purple, as if he had just heard about the disaster, and Laura looked as if she had been slapped in the face. "Do you own this place?" my father finally managed. "In partnership with Robert Dawson," I said. "It's been 6 years." "But you said you still work at that restaurant," her mother put in, reproachfully. I didn't specify my position, I shrugged. "You never asked." Aunt Linda, the one who had moved to give me a seat at the family dinner, was the first to recover. "Bella, this is amazing," she said. "The restaurant is wonderful. You must be so proud." And immediately there was a whole chorus of questions, voices, congratulations. Everyone wanted to know how, when, and why I hadn't told them. My cousins looked on with obvious admiration, and my aunts and uncles seemed genuinely interested in my success. Only my parents and Laura sat in silence, as if the truth was too much for them. "I'm sorry to interrupt your celebration," I said with a politeness that hid an icy determination, "but I just wanted to recommend today's special dish, truffle risotto. Exceptional. Although, at $80 per serving, it may seem expensive." I said these words, looking straight into Laura's eyes, repeating her previous humiliation, and her face flushed, not from heat, but from anger and shame. She tried to smile, but her lips were trembling and her eyes were darting. At that moment, her glow dimmed, and all the attention, family, guests, staff, focused on me. "I need to get back to work," I added calmly. "Have a nice evening." I turned around and returned to the office, slowly closing the glass door behind me. Through her, I could see the chaos that was left behind. My relatives started talking all at once. Laura flushed with anger, interrupting David when he tried to insert a word, and suddenly it became clear. They finally saw me as I always was, only now it was impossible to pretend that I was everything. The same girl with the tray. My parents looked stunned, as if someone had suddenly pulled out from under their feet the carpet on which their idea of who I was had rested for decades, and all their confidence that Laura was the top of the family pyramid began to crack at the seams. From time to time, they glanced in the direction of my office, as if they couldn't believe that I, their daughter, was really sitting behind the glass in the executive chair, surrounded by awards and recognition, and not in an apron and with a tray, as they used to imagine me. And I should have felt the triumph, the exultation of my victory, the satisfaction of fulfilling a fantasy that I sometimes dreamed of as a teenager: a big stage, admiring glances, apologies, admiration. But instead, I felt only emptiness, as if an inner spring, twisted for years in anticipation of this moment, suddenly snapped, leaving behind only fatigue. Their approval or disapproval no longer had any power over me. I built my life without them, without their support, without their love. And she didn't just survive, but became someone she could never have become if she had remained under their control. So what was I trying to prove? Why were you still waiting for them to say we're proud of you? I turned away from the window so as not to see their faces, and concentrated on my laptop, scrolling through the architectural plans of the new branch in front of my eyes. In a month we will open a restaurant in another city, our first venture outside the metropolis. The project is ambitious, promising, and requires absolute concentration. Work was my anchor. An hour later, when they were finishing their desserts, my work phone rang. It was the receiving party. "Miss Mitchell, your parents would like to talk to you before leaving." I hesitated, but then I agreed. A couple of minutes later, they entered my office, slowly, nervously, as if every step required effort from them. Their eyes skimmed over the awards on the walls, the framed restaurant reviews from reputable publications, and the photos of Robert and me smiling against the backdrop of the opening ribbons. "That's very impressive, Bella," my father finally said, in a flat voice that, despite his best efforts, did not lose his embarrassment. "Thank you," I replied shortly. "We'd like to have dinner with you sometime," Mom added, "at your place. We'd be interested to see where you live now." I knew what was going on. Now that I've stopped being a family disappointment, become successful, rich, and worthy of recognition, they finally want to be closer. But where were they when I was sleeping on a cot in an apartment for 3? Where were their invitations then? I'm sorry, but I'm very busy right now, I replied. Opening a new establishment requires all my attention. I wish you a good night. They left, and I watched the whole family gather at the entrance to the restaurant. Laura waved her arms, clearly annoyed. Her face and movements indicated that the evening did not meet her expectations. My parents looked as if they had just come out of a long and not very pleasant sleep. The rest of the relatives exchanged glances, sometimes glancing at the facade of the restaurant, probably still comprehending what had happened. On Sunday morning, I was woken up by 3 missed calls and a text message from my parents asking when can we meet? I didn't answer. On Monday, I received 5 more calls and a voice message from my mother, who used the affectionate word dear for the first time in years and offered to have lunch at any restaurant I chose. On Tuesday, it was my father's turn. We are very proud of you, Bella. We want to be a part of your life again. By Wednesday, aunts and uncles started calling. Amy wrote that everyone in the family is talking about me, discussing my success. Aunt Linda, the one who was once the only one who gave me a seat at the family table, called me personally. I've always believed in you, darling, a surprisingly convenient revision of history. And on Thursday morning, when I was reviewing the resumes of candidates for the new position of chief for a branch in a new city, my phone rang again, this time with an unknown number. And, against my better judgment, I answered. Bella Mitchell. Bella, this is David. Laura's husband. My brain immediately tensed up. It was unexpected. What can I do for you, David? I'll get right to the point, he said hurriedly. I'm expanding my car repair business, as you probably know. The bank is having trouble with loans right now, and I was hoping that you could lend us $50,000. It's a family investment, you know. I almost laughed out loud. And why would I do that, David? Well, we're a family, he said, as if that was supposed to explain everything. And it would mean a lot to Laura. She's very upset after Saturday. I'm sure her evening was ruined by, well, you. The sister she had rejected for years is worthless. I'm not interested in investing in your business, David, I said, without raising my voice. But good luck with the bank. Come on, Bella, you have money now. It won't kill you to help your sister. The same sister who publicly called me a loser. Who said I was too poor to attend her party. There was a long pause. She didn't mean that. You know how Laura can be. Yes, unfortunately, I knew. I spent my childhood and youth watching Laura allow herself to be tough, moody, unpunished, because her parents always justified her. Because she was allowed to be cruel, whereas I had to be quiet. My answer was short, cold, and final, no, spoken with such clarity that the air between us was as sharp as a knife blade, and before David could find something to say in response, I had already hung up the phone. Less than an hour later, my phone vibrated again, and a name that I seemed to have burned out of my memory appeared on the screen, Laura. You're selfish, she spat out without preamble, her voice taut as a string and filled with rage that knew no bounds or restraint. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're taking revenge on me by refusing to help David. I took a deep breath, holding it, as if hoping it would take away the remnants of the pain she could inflict with childlike ease. I don't envy you, Laura, I never have. Then why don't you lend us some money? You can obviously afford it, you just want to see us suffer. I exhaled and, without raising my voice, said, I spent years being ignored by this family, years when I was told that I was not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough, and now that I have what you want, you suddenly remembered that I exist. There was a long silence, in which I could feel her struggling to digest my words, trying to find an answer that wouldn't sound empty. All right, she said at last, with a distinct hurt in her voice, be it so. Everyone says that money has made you cold and mean. You think you're too good for your family now. I could barely contain my laughter, because the twisted logic of her accusations was so transparent that it looked more like a drowning man trying to grasp at straws. Goodbye, Laura, I said, and before she could answer, I blocked her number. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of business and decisions. We were finalizing plans for the new branch, hiring key staff, and working to adapt the menu to the tastes of the new market. Robert and I spent long days in meetings, discussing dozens of scenarios, and nights working on every little detail, from furniture to suppliers. My family, despite my refusal, continued their campaign to return to my life. Flowers came to my office, without postcards, but I knew who they were from. My mother left voice messages full of tears, which contained the words that I wanted to hear 20 years ago. My father sent me a long email in which he recalled my school achievements, those that he didn't seem to know about before. I ignored them all. It wasn't cruelty, but self-defense. I already knew how their sudden expressions of interest ended. You know, Robert said one day, when we were reviewing the design plans for a new restaurant, you could meet with them when you're done with this project. I looked up from my laptop and asked, why? They won't stop. And it distracts me. He didn't argue. He was right. Despite my efforts, thoughts of my family continued to break through the curtain of my work like a draft into a closed room, memories, imaginary dialogues, scenes in which they finally apologize. But I didn't know what I would say to them, that I had built my life without them and no longer needed them. Or that maybe I want a relationship, but only on new, fair terms. Maybe someday, but not now. There was too much work to do right now. And we did it. The new restaurant has become our biggest undertaking, not just a place to eat, but a culinary space with separate dining rooms, open kitchens for workshops, and a rooftop bar filled with light, music, and flavors. It was ambitious, expensive, grandiose, and it was exactly the challenge I needed to feel like I was still growing. On the day the lease was signed, Robert and his wife, Diana, invited me to celebrate the beginning of a new chapter. We were sitting at a table by the window, overlooking the street, where spring also seemed to be celebrating at that moment. To the best partner Robert could find, Diana toasted, raising a glass of champagne. Robert smiled and added, I still can't believe that you were only 22 when you proposed that major renovation. The smartest decision I've ever made is to listen to you. Thank you, I said, feeling a wave of warmth rise in my chest that had nothing to do with alcohol. For taking the risk, for believing in me when no one else did. Diana leaned forward, reached across the table, and squeezed my hand. That's what a real family does, Bella. They believe in you. They support you. They rejoice in your victories, not afraid of them. Her words struck a chord with me. The people at this table, Robert, Diana, our managers, chefs, even some regular customers who have become friends, have given me more support, more love, more acceptance than my biological family has ever given me. They were my real family. And at that moment, looking at their faces full of pride, respect, and sincere joy for me, I realized that I no longer needed to turn a blind eye to my parents or Laura. I didn't need their belated interest or their approval. I already had everything that was really important. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.